I was like, how do I do the segue? Someone mentioned like a sunken thing, and I'm like, okay, there was that prison outside Boston. Say, I'm like, you know what? That's a bridge too far. I'm not even going to attempt that. But I'm so happy you brought us in here because we are here to talk about Avatar, and we have some amazing guests here. Guests who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves in just a little bit. But I think before we start, Daniel, I think there's a disclaimer that we need to quickly go over. Would you mind?
Yes, absolutely. We wrote this just before this. We just want to let everyone know, anyone watching us live, listening on Patreon, or watching on YouTube, that the views expressed by the guests of this episode and those of Asians Represent Limited do not reflect those of Magpie Games and Viacom. So yeah, we're here to talk about Avatar and, you know, our experiences, and of course, you know, like all the other cool and amazing stuff that you folks do, right? But Steve, since I'm a part of this Avatar journey, I'm not going to host this podcast because it would be, I don't know, I feel weird doing this. But I will say thank you to Magpie Games for sponsoring this episode of Asians Represent. Magpie Games were actually the first sponsors of this podcast years ago when we did our Masks series. So yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, way back. We were actually talking, speaking of way back, talking about like strange sort of places that we've recorded the podcast. We were reminiscing over the episode that Sen, Banana Chan, and I did sitting on the floor with mics that didn't fully work. And then in my head, I was like, but the best one was when Mendez and I sat on that bed.
Oh yeah, we snuggled up to the mic.
We snuggled up to the mic in the hotel room and talked about Thousand Arrows. And that's how you and I met. But good memories.
I do, as much as cons freak me out right now, I do miss the stories that come out of them. Like my story for Asian Represent Cons is that I showed up in cosplay and they ran me down because I had a lot of fake guns on me in a hotel where no one else was dressed up. And I had security like be like, sir, you need to put those away. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like, I thought this was like a cosplay thing.
Wow. So okay, let me put some more context.
Blade always just walks into places. So why can't I?
Steve showed up to Breakout Con cosplaying as Red Hood. For even more context there. Yeah, good memories from cons. But Steve, you are you're hosting this one.
He has the con.
You have the con.
Thank you so much. No, this is great, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to like talk to all of you amazing folks. Like I said, kind of off screen, I'm very starstruck, and I'm going to be more starstruck as I ask you to introduce yourselves. I am going to go Mendez, Shrong, Yisun, and Sen, because Sen, you have a secret question at the end here. I know, right?
Wait, there's a secret question?
There's a secret question, and Daniel, you wrote it, so that's very odd.
Oh no, you mean the one that I wrote at the end of our notes thing?
That would make it a secret, yeah.
Oh, but that's for later. That's just to come up in conversation. That doesn't have to come up right away.
Okay, so Sen, sit on that and stress about that for an hour.
Everyone just everyone get your hopes up.
No, I think it's a great question. First of all, I think it will tie into what everyone else here does. Like, I think y'all are amazing. Like, I wrote these like little like introductions about all of you. But if Steve wanted to read them, they're like, I think they're. I like them.
I would love for our guests to introduce themselves, and I'll read out what you wrote, and we can see the delta there. But for our wonderful guests, if you wouldn't mind introducing who you are, your pronouns, maybe any projects that you want to kind of talk about, that'd be great. And I'll go Mendez, Shrong, Yisun, and Sen.
What's good? I'm James Mendez Hodes. You can call me Mendez. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a senior developer on Avatar Legends, and I'm a full-time writer, game designer, and cultural consultant. I'd say I'm like 30 to 40% writing and design, and then 60-70% cultural consulting at this point in my career. And what am I working on? Mostly Avatar right now. But Thousand Arrows is in layout, so that's cool. So those of you who backed it, you're all reading through most of it already. And then I'm also doing a lot of like exciting cultural consulting for a bunch of different clients. Jackbox Games is one of them. And then Wizards of the Coast is another. I'm looking at a lot of upcoming Magic material, and I really wish I could talk about it.
That's like we could just like clip that and people can just play that. Like that's a great sound clip.
We got the scoop. We got the scoop.
Yes. Yeah.
That's so
but
good.
I'm allowed to say I'm working for them. That much I am sure of.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So lucky.
The Magic stuff, it's going to have cards. Planeswalkers. There's going to be Planeswalkers.
Whoa.
And lands. Definitely some lands.
I love that. I'm working on something
first.
called Magic. There's going to be Magic and some gathering. It's going to be great.
There actually
It's a
isn't that
gathering
much
of
gathering.
magicians. It's a gathering
Less
of
gathering
magicians.
than you'd think. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well,
and I still don't know what Deckmaster means on the back. I don't know what's going on with that.
you
Why
need
does
to
it say that?
Oh
You
yeah,
need
it
to
does,
look
it does,
this
it does
up.
say that on the back.
Why does it say? Yeah.
But it's great having you here. Moving on,
Thank you.
Shrong, if you would mind, who you are, your pronouns, and maybe some things you're working on.
Yeah, so I am Sharang Biswas. I'm a game designer, writer, and interactive artist. I'm currently based in New York City. I'm adjunct professor at NYU Game Center and Fordham Department of Computer Science, where I teach game design. And I'm also currently the game artist in residence at the Museum of the Moving Image, specifically working with the education department. Yeah, so some things are working out. Yansu and I are actually finalizing the last bits of a project called Strange Lusts, Strange Loves. We are the co-editors of it. It is an anthology of interactive fiction, all discussing different aspects of human sexuality and desire. It is a free thing. It's going to be coming out on the Strange Horizons magazine, their website. So do check that out. We got some like really famous, fancy, award-winning speculative fiction writers to contribute to the project. And Yansu and I are pretty proud of it, I think. So that was cool. And everyone's friend Banana Chan was our producer for that project, or like sponsor, whatever, for that project. If you're following the IGDN Awards, another project that Yansu and I are both on, called Honey and Hot Wax, an anthology of erotic art games, you may be sensing a passion here, was just nominated for Game of the Year at IGDN. It is an anthology that Lucian Khan and I co-edited of LARPs and tabletop role-playing games, mainly LARPs, again, themed on sex and sexuality, and we have this whole artist statement about why we're making this project. And otherwise, there are a couple, I've worked on a lot of things. I was on the team for Ghostfire Games' latest 5e compatible bestiary, where I wrote a lot of creatures, and I focused a lot on how they reproduce. And I realized, again, this might be a theme. I'm working on, my short story is coming out in a new anthology by Neon Hemlock Press, which is a small press that does queer-themed speculative fiction. There's an anthology called Unfettered Hexes, which is about queerness and witchcraft coming out. I have a story there inspired by the video game Hades. And I have short stories upcoming in Lightspeed Magazine, Lightspeed Magazine, and I can't even remember,
Fantasy.
a couple of different magazines. What was that?
Fantasy, right?
No, the fantasy one was just published.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And a couple of other places. So I do a lot of writing as well as game design, and I have a couple of projects that I cannot talk about without, I can't even hint about them like Mendez did.
Could be Magic, could be Gathering, probably not.
Yeah, and I have a couple of interactive theater projects in the works as well. So yeah, come to New York, check it out.
So what I heard here was you're busy.
I'm foreign.
That too.
I also love that you're like, oh yeah, and like there's a theme going on here. You say theme, I say branding.
I mean, a lot of my works are either about food or about sex. So like the lizard brain is my branding, I guess. So,
I mean, there's worse branding, I think. So I'm into it. But moving on, Yensu, if you wouldn't mind, who are you? Your pronouns and what are you working on?
I ask myself that every day. Who am I? Yeah, I'm Yunsu, Julian Kim, they, them, or she, her. And I am a contributing designer for the Avatar RPG, mostly working on setting stuff, like all the eras you've been hearing about. I do like a bunch of random stuff. Like I work mostly in tabletop, I would say, tabletop RPGs. I've done a couple of card games, one of which I can talk about, which is Battle of the Boy Bands.
I was one of the OG testers of that.
Yes. Oh my, like when it was like on index cards, basically.
Yep.
That was published by Game and a Curry, owned by Banana Chan, who we're gonna just keep mentioning.
Let's just keep mentioning
and Janitor Games.
Oh yeah, and Janitor Interactive, which that was like me and my co-designer Vicky Ho. Oh God, what else have I done?
I mentioned two of
What have you done?
What have I done?
Wait, Yansu, you do have Magical Kitties Save the Day, recently nominated
Yes.
for Best Family Game / Product at the 2021 Annie Awards.
It's true, which I found out from your tweet because
I got you.
I was like, I saw like a congratulations thing, and I was like, wait, what happened?
What happened?
So Yansu is currently simultaneously technically nominated for in a project for both IGDN and Ennies right now.
Yeah, Pass the Sugar Please is like a awkward communication BDSM tea party game. That's the shortest way I can explain it. That's part of Honey and Hot Wax. I wrote the Mars colony setting for Magical Kitty Save the Day, which is kind of like an adventure setting. I wrote an interactive horror novel called The Fog Knows Your Name for Choice of Games, which you can get on the Choice of Games app, and you can put it on browser or phone or what have you.
All my undergrads love Yansu's horror game. Just
that makes me happy. And I also I designed a bunch of LARPs. So like one of them is The Long Drive Back from Busan, which is about like a struggling K-pop boy group that's just like trying to like get their act together for like one big performance that will kind of determine the future of their careers. And yeah, I also do cultural consulting sometimes with Mendez. Often with Mendez, I feel like, because I don't do it as often as you do. So the percentage of like cultural consulting projects I do with you is quite high.
Yes.
That's
I love
me.
it. I should have grabbed my physical copy of Battle of the Boy Bands because I got the lanyard, I got all the pins and everything. Like I'm into it because way back when the plan was next like tabletop RPG con, because like I was big into anime and like cosplay cons. But next tabletop RPG con, get all my friends, we're gonna sit in a hotel room, we're gonna play it. It's gonna be amazing. So that's 100%.
We should.
I'm gonna get it down from a
together.
shelf just so I can hold it up.
We should cosplay together as as members of characters from that card game, and then we'll strut around at a con together.
I will say I'm getting a lot of joy out of planning cosplays that are people's like OC / from RPGs. Yes. So like my last cosplay before like having to put it on the shelf a little bit while I like survived a pandemic was Daniel's Mask character, which could be like an archetype for a boy band, but it's definitely more like a it straddles the line between superhero and boy band.
There's a character in the game called the Momager. The Momager.
There it is.
And one of us should cosplay the Momager. Just
say.
Yeah.
My flatmate's pointing at herself from the kitchen.
She wants to be the momager?
Yep.
That'd be awesome.
What I'm saying is that all y'all out there cosplay and RPGs, like that's a great intersection there. As I move on, Daniel, looks like we have a Nightbot kind of error. Would you want to take a look at that?
Don't worry about that. It's oh my God. No, don't worry about the Nightbot error. It's all good.
All right, sounds good.
We've been hacked.
No. That's just I just made a mistake.
Daniel hacked us.
It was just
inside.
it was literally just a repeating thing that was like, go to the Kickstarter.
Speaking of Kickstarter, I don't know. That's a bad segue. But Sen,
what?
Sen, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, who are you? Your pronouns, stuff you're working on.
Sure. My name is Sen Fong Lim. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a therapist and a psychology professor from London, Ontario, Canada. And when I'm not doing that, I make a heckload of games. So I am a contributing writer to the Avatar Legends project, co-designer of Jiangshi, Blood in the Banquet Hall. Oh yeah, I did that thing too.
You did like a whole game. You did like a whole licensed Avatar game.
Yeah, I did that game right there. That's the Legend of Korra Pro Bending Arena that Jesse Wright and I made for IDW Games, which has awesome miniatures. If you are
One
playing
day I will
in
actually
that era,
play this game.
I think you'll really like it, Mendez. It's good. I like it a lot, and I'm obviously biased, but there you go. I work a lot in licensed games, so I've worked with like if you name a movie studio or a creative studio, I've probably done work for them at some point in time. Dungeons and Dragons, Rock Paper Wizards, WWE, Scooby-Doo, which was super fun. Kingdom Rush. So I work for apps and video games. We just announced the Goonies today. So an escape room based in the Goonies. So if you like the Goonies, the movie, which has my, probably one of my favorite Asian characters ever. Data is awesome. And it's funny. So I get to do a lot of writing and rewriting in these particular series. So in games called the Korra Chronicles series, I do a lot of writing in the characters' voices. And so I take that opportunity to actually change things about the characters, which is okay because the studio actually says you can't do this, you can't do that. Like for the Goonies, we're not allowed to do anything about the truffle shuffle. If you've ever seen the movie, it's a kind of, it's fat shaming. And so we can't write about that. Even though it was an iconic thing that happened in the movie. But we can also do things like, hey, I wrote a little bit more about, Data's history, and because Data's my favorite character. And I cut out parts about, Data mispronouncing things, because in the script, if you actually ever read the script, Data pronounces it correctly first and Mikey pronounces it incorrectly first. So it's pretty interesting. There's some stuff in there that comes across as dated and a little bit racist. But we can cut that out because it doesn't have to follow the script exactly. Anyway, so yeah, that just got released. And then I think that might be all I can talk about. There's a lot of other stuff, but I'm sorry, I just can't tell you yet. But I'll be sure to.
That's great. I know I said at the top of this kind of segment, I would go through the descriptions that Daniel wrote for all of y'all, but to be honest, you hit everything that he wrote. So like, give yourselves an internal round of applause. Daniel only had to help out like once or twice here, but you would have got there eventually. Except of course, the secret question, which we're going to save off for a little bit.
It's not a secret question. It's mostly
I'm 100% playing this up because I know it's your question and I'm going to like put it on a pedestal.
It's not a question. It's more of like, oh, this would be a great segue. Like I don't normally write down my segues, but I was like, oh, I think this one's really good.
This is good.
Like, this is going to make me seem really smart, but now it's not.
But that's all we're going to say about it, because then you have to sit on that for the next like 30, 45 minutes before you figuring it out. But you actually mentioned something throughout this. Before I go on, I didn't introduce myself or Daniel, but I'm Steve. I'm one of the co-hosts of Asians Represent, one of the crew members. I use he, him pronouns. And this is what I do. I struggle my way through interviews.
This is not a struggle. This isn't a struggle. This is like a flow. You're just flowing through this interview.
Thank you.
Hey,
Daniel.
Hey, I'm Daniel. I'm Daniel. I guess I'm one of the contributing designers to Avatar. You know me from Asians Represent. I don't know. Today's a pretty cool day. Asians Represent got nominated for another Emmy for Best Podcast.
Woot-woot.
This is our third year in a row. Hopefully we win this year. That's really cool. I'm also two other projects that I worked on, the Ancestry and Culture 5e sort of like hack that you could do, and my dad's Monster Manual were both nominated for Ennies, some multiple, so that's pretty cool. I'm working on some stuff as well. One I can't talk about.
That thing, right? Yeah,
that thing. Oh, yeah. I'm one of the lead designers on our project that's coming out in 2022. Super hyped for it. And I'm working on something independently. I just released a text for a micro wuxia setting.
Nice.
You could use in any fantasy TTRPGs. I am currently working with a Chinese illustrator and painter to do some art, and I'm meeting with my graphic designer next week. I'm going to put that out hopefully soon. Same graphic designer who did Wicked Congregation, my game about cults trying to kill you.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's going to be the setting for our next Dungeons and Asians thing. It's going to start there.
Nice.
I'm so excited to restart that. Dungeons and Asians, that setting you've built, Daniel, and like the way we're weaving the stories and things like that is an experience that I just cannot stop gushing about. So yeah, so much love from me.
My home game has to suffer while I test things out with them. But Steve, where are we going to start? Because we came here to talk about Avatar. Actually, there are a couple of things that I wrote on these intros. Because I wrote, for Mendez, I wrote game designer, writer, martial artist, cultural consultant, knows a lot about orcs.
Yes.
For Hyunsu, I wrote game designer, TTRPG and board games, interactive fiction writer, cultural consultant. For Sharang, I wrote game artist in residence at the Museum of Moving Image, adjunct professor at Fordham University. And then for Senfung, I wrote psychology professor, martial artist, prolific board game designer, co-host of the Meeple Syrup Show.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that thing. 'Cause we're on hiatus for the summer because most of us are teachers. I also am a co-host of the Ludology podcast. I forgot about that too.
I was on before Senfung became a co-host.
But
I was also on that.
Yeah,
that was how I got on. That led to me working on Frosthaven.
Yep.
Oh, sick. So one of the things that, like, sorry, Steve,
you have a good energy about this. I'm happy to give you the mic here. Go for it.
So what I really
Daniel.
like about this episode was, like, first of all, like, I talk to y'all like very frequently, and not just about Avatar stuff, but like I talk to y'all a lot. And I think the one thing that I really enjoyed about this episode, because I knew that a lot of people would be watching it live or later, is that, you know, I get to interview my friends, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do a lot of research into my friends. And no, that's not creepy.
Normal. That's normal. Yeah.
Creepy. I went
Having a normal one, researching my friends.
Just researching my friends. So one of the things that I think is really fantastic is that, like, you know, I look at all of your different backgrounds and all of the stuff that you've worked on, and I'm like, oh, you know, like, we all have drastically different backgrounds that are invaluable to adapting the world of Avatar to TTRPGs, right? Like Sen, you know, martial arts background. Not only have you worked with the Avatar IP before, but, you know, your background as a psychology professor are also really important. And this wasn't a secret question or anything, Steve, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about today was your work incorporating, like, psychological theories into game design. And specifically, I watched a talk you did about Vygotsky's sociocultural theory of learning, and, you know, how the social process of learning can be related to games. And learning itself, you know, as Mendez mentioned in one of our meetings, like, a long time ago, is one of the core sort of design pillars of Avatar. So I was like, you know what, like, Sen is, like, uniquely qualified to be working on this from, like, multiple avenues. And then I look at, like, Sharang, and I see, like, you know, the really innovative work that you do. Like, I'm so curious about, like, you know, like, a shroud for the seneschal, right? And a lot of your, like, work with young people and you know, people who are also on the spectrum. And, like, Avatar is something that is very much geared for families. And I see the work that you do and the work that you do with young people. And so I'm like, oh, this is a really cool perspective to bring into Avatar. And that was, you know, very, very much on display in all of our design meetings. And then, of course, like, Hyunsu, like, you've worked on, like, a variety of things. You've, like, board games, TTRPGs. First of all, like, Annie and IGDN, like, nominated. I don't think anybody is that this year, right? I'm also here to just, like, talk up my friends. But also, like, you've worked with properties that have, like, Asian themes, and you've worked on adapting your own background into them. So, like, one of the things that you did, and you didn't mention, was your work on Hearts of Wulin. And you wrote a Korean setting contribution to a game that's very much based on a Chinese media genre, right? And then, of course, let's go to Mendez. Like, one thing you didn't mention, Mendez, was your work with Fate Core and Iron Street Combat and designing combat systems. Like, not only do you have a martial arts background, but you also have experience working in more, like, narratively driven games like Thousand Arrows, and you know, more, like, combat oriented, like, settings, and, like, I guess you could say more freeform games like Fate, which is really interesting. And then I guess I'm here too. But, you know, combining
but you designed Ross rifles, which is another Apocalypse World hack, which is about soldiers in World War I, right? So you have that totally, like, military perspective informed by your academic background doing, like, history and archaeology.
And I guess I wrote that.
That seems kind of relevant.
I guess I wrote that Kung Fu Adventure for Candlekeep.
That Kung Fu Adventure, which I just talked up on an interview the other day.
Oh, bless.
Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. But, like, look, I think everyone at the virtual table right now has brought something like really unique to Avatar, a property that sits in a really interesting sort of, I guess, state right now, right? Because like the original Avatar was created by two non-Asian people, but it's like generally viewed as an example of like positive representation. It's received like critical acclaim for like its characters, its setting, and everything like that. But one thing that's really cool about the Avatar Legends TTRPG is that there are Asian people who are, you know, working behind the scenes and are present at these design conversations and contributing as well. And that's kind of what, you know, Steve and I wanted to highlight with this episode. It's just like how awesome you are and how, you know, amazing it is that Magpie brought all of you onto this project. Because I guarantee all of you have had a massive positive impact on it. Right? Avatar
Legends is a really interesting project, especially, so Sen-Foong, for example, is used to working with stories created by other people, right? The Sen-Foong has done this a lot with a lot of the board games he's worked on, right? A lot of my work, a lot of my highly acclaimed work, right? The ones that have won awards and things are very like tiny niche artsy experiences, like Honey and Hot Wax, my game in there involves you giving blowjobs to someone in real life, right? Like I make these very like bizarre tiny games. So this is the first time I've worked on a game that sits at this nexus of so many people's work, right? Because like you said, the Avatar original TV show from which everything spawns was started by these two people, right? By these two guys. But then I know for a fact that a lot of the work Yun-Su has been doing is reading the Avatar comics to mine it for inspiration for work, which means not only are the two creators there, the comic writers and artists and whatever are coming into play directly into this book. And then again, the game system we are using is powered by what? The Apocalypse, right? Which means Apocalypse World by Vincent Mackay Baker becomes a really core component of this game to which we are all adding, right? So this is a game that you can't truly describe it as made only by us or made only by the lead designer, or there's Apocalypse World that Mendes is showing, or made only by Magpie Games, or made only by Viacom, right? There are all these different forces that are contributing to the game. And it's actually I think it's a very unusual example of a game, and especially when you bring in like Yun-Su and me, who we worked on bigger commercial projects, but our main work is like tiny, weird things, right? So,
So on that idea, something that I was really curious about, that I'm hoping to kind of pull out of here. So, open question here. For most Apocalypse games, there are themes that the game is really trying to drive towards. For Avatar, are there like specific themes that you feel that the game is trying to kind of push towards? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think one pretty central theme that is going to be a part of every Avatar game, because it's right there on the character sheet, is balance.
Mm-hmm.
So in Avatar, every single character has a balance track on their character sheet. And if you remember the Angel playbook for Monster Hearts First Edition, or you played, if you played Scion Second Edition, another one of the games I worked on a lot, the virtue system is really similar to this. But in Avatar Legends, every single PC has a balance track with two principles. And those principles are kind of in tension, and they're different for every playbook, like tradition and progress for the successor playbook, or force versus care for the Hammer playbook. And a character in Avatar Legends is constantly getting pulled between those two ideas, which are both really, really important to them. But when you get pulled towards one or the other pole, or when other people in the world push you towards one or the other pole, and Masks players might remember when somebody tells you who you are or how the world works, it's a lot like that. So when someone pushes you towards one of those ideas, it has like pretty serious consequences and give you like great advantages, but also also pretty serious like liabilities and disadvantages. So your own like emotional and like moral balance between like different ideas is going to be a huge part of the game for, I think, pretty much every game. And then the conflicts that you run into in the world, I think we're going to reflect that thing that's going on in every individual character's heart. Because if you look at, for example, The Promise, the first of the sequel comics, one of the things that the characters are grappling with in the wake of the first TV series is decolonizing the Fire Nation holdings in the Earth Kingdom, and balancing the priority of decolonization and the Earth Kingdom sovereignty with the reality of these colonies having been present for like 100 years, and all of the like complexities and realities present in that. So yeah, like if I had to pick one word, I think it would be balance. As like a defining theme.
I think what's really cool about the balance thing is that it takes something that I really enjoy. So, like the dramatic pulls from Hillfolk. And I think it actually gives them mechanical importance in the game, which I think is a really important thing, especially if you're teaching new people who especially aren't actually playing TTRPGs and are just fans of Avatar, like how to do this and how to, have these interesting narrative stakes for their playbook. And then, of course, it meshes well with the fact that, Powered by the Apocalypse games, generally like, your playbook tells a story, right? And the decisions that you make on that playbook will impact, the kind of character that you make. You also are making choices outside of, how your character functions mechanically. But I think what, the balancing does really well is kind of marrying the two, right? That narrative and the mechanical component of the game.
Yeah,
I think that. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Sharon.
I think that mimics some of the themes of the game that the game has projected into the larger world, right? So I'm doing a lot of work with the GM side of the game. And one of the things that's really important that you see in the show, like the show Avatar is powerful because it is a children's show that doesn't treat children as stupid, right? And that sounds weird, but a lot of children's shows treat children as stupid, right? It's only more recently that when we things like, Steven Universe and stuff that were like, no, these are shows that treat children as intelligent and as children who appreciate complex, developed characters with flaws and things like that, right? And Avatar does that, at least starting from later on in the show, like I would say second season onward especially, this becomes a thing, right? And one of the things that the show grapples with really well is that few people in the world are evil, right? There's not really there's very little in the world that like this is a force of pure evil, right? We can see this really well with the Fire Nation, for example, right? And the characters come out of the Fire Nation, like Prince Zuko is like, I would say the best example of that, right? But he has these motivations that we think are bad, but like why and what, and we unpack that, right? And the game does that a lot with this idea of balance, and also with the way it tells GMs to handle their stuff, right? There's very little that's evil. Think about complexities, think about what motivations and drives are, think about like NPC balance, all that stuff. I think that's a really powerful, positive thing, which is very different from a game like Masks, right? Which has like, there are evil, there are villains, right? And I know you can play it a different way, but if you want to play it in this comic book way, you play it with like, these are baddies, right? And I think that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say that the whole idea of the balance to me is really nice because it's simple. And for the audience that I think Avatar Legends aims itself at, which is not necessarily people who are deeply steeped in RPG lore or experience even, having something that shows the dual nature of a character through this tug of war in your balance is a really easy way to start getting into understanding how the context of the world, the characters around you, the situation that you're in can drive your character to behave in certain ways that aren't what you might think they should be, but because of who that character is, it might be how they react. So actually, forcing you to do a little role playing instead of just being who you want to be all the time. And so I really do like the simplicity of the balance system. It has enough nuance to it and enough crunch to it that I think, veteran gamers will appreciate it, but enough simplicity that newer gamers will be able to understand it and really like implement it to its fullest, straight off the bat. It's got that real easy hook to it. So I quite enjoy the balance system as well. I think it's like central on the sheet. If I remember, it's like dead in the middle of it.
You can't avoid it.
It's like
you
it's
cannot
right
avoid
in the
it.
middle of the top third of the front page of the playbook.
Yeah, so your eyes are drawn to it, and it really does. It is the quintessential nature of your playbook, like in like 5 lines of bubbles and text and stuff. That's it. That's a lot of who your character is in essence. So it's a really good way of boiling it down.
Yeah. What about you, Yasu?
There we go. Sorry. Let's turn my audio back on. Yeah, I mean, just circling back to the idea of like themes and with Powered by the Apocalypse games, like, yeah, like I feel generally they thrive the most when you get very specific about what the themes are. And of course, like I'm not working very directly with like mechanics and things like that. I'm very focused on like the setting and basically trying to make sure that everything that you need to play the game is in this book, like lore wise and like knowing about the universe and the world. And like one thing that we're trying to do is to make sure that each of the eras that we have represented feel very distinct. And that means kind of laying out like, okay, these are the themes that really shine and show through during this era, like on a societal level, and also kind of like what we see in the shows, in the books, in the comics at that time. Like what are the things that we're seeing the main characters go through, and then also like on a wider level, like how is that reflected or connected to what's going on like on the global stage. And so it's been I don't want to reveal too much because I'm not sure how much like I can say, but that's something that I'm really excited about, is to see like as people play the game more and they choose different eras to play in, like how much people lean into those kind of era specific themes that come up.
I hope they do. I really hope they do.
I really do too. I mean, like you put so much work into the lore. I think out of all of us here, you have done the most lore-based work. You were also the
100%.
only one here who has a page on the Avatar wiki.
That was a shock.
I'm so salty about this.
We talked about this for a long time when that happened. You're like, oh my god.
It is weeks later, and no one has made an Avatar wiki page for me.
Should I make?
I think that's
there's
a
the
column.
column. Yeah, there's the column.
Fandom.
Get
Hey
on that.
fandom. Let's make this happen.
And one thing I want to say is, I would argue perhaps that the nebulous concept of theme is possibly the most challenging thing to put into a game, right? If we're going all academic, right? If we're thinking of the like classic game design model of mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics, right? Theme is at the tip of this aesthetics pyramid that we as game designers have a lot less direct control of. We can tell someone as much until we're blue in the face that this is the theme, playing it. But if they don't engage in that through their play and through the stories they create, then that is not the theme, right? And so I'm actually very interested in seeing, I mean, obviously we're doing a lot of play testing about this, but I'm very interested in seeing exactly how folks interpret these themes that Young-Soo so painstakingly teased out of this giant mass of media that exists, again, written by lots of people whose name we can't all name all of them right now, because they're like dozens and dozens of episode writers and comics writers and stuff who all deserve credit, because Young-Soo like teased out these themes from all this and like plopped them in a concise, accessible way into the book, right?
I do want to dig more into the world building. I have a lot of questions about the world building and like what's going on there, so I will get to that. But just staying on mechanics for a little bit while longer, this idea of balance is really interesting to me. Obviously, I haven't seen the mechanics itself yet, but I think there's, especially in Powered by the Apocalypse games, there's this kind of tension from a design perspective of how, I guess, crunchy you want it to be. Give you an example. I read L5R on 80%, and the concept of balance was there, but literally it was a scale from 0 to 100. Like you were either 0 on balance or 100 on balance. And those took forms of like glory and honor and things like that. I imagine that's probably not the direction that this game went with. Can you kind of walk me through kind of the thought process of like how you go about navigating, trying to highlight your theme while also having the mechanics kind of feel natural and accessible to your tables?
Yeah, sure. So I did the initial like design of the balance system, and so so one thing that happens a lot in Apocalypse World games, and that's been present in Apocalypse World games since first edition, is the idea that you have various different stats. When you roll dice in Apocalypse World, you usually roll 2d6, and then a 6 or lower, something bad happens. A 7 or higher, you get what you want. But a 7 to 9 is a more mixed and complicated result than a 10 plus, which is a more unequivocally or especially good result. And the stat that you roll with usually it's your character has a bunch of set stats defining what you're good or bad at. That's common in many Apocalypse World games. But since the first edition of Apocalypse World, there have been special abilities that have allowed a character to substitute one stat for another in a situation where they wouldn't normally be able to roll it. Like if I have the hot and cool stats defining how like sexy or how like cool under pressure I am, maybe I'm a character whose sexiness is based on how like chill and confident I am. So I roll cool when in situations where other characters might roll hot. So the balance track goes from -3 to +3. So if you have 2 poles on it, let's go back, let's say tradition and progress. If you have a tradition of +3, then that means your progress, the opposed value, is at -3. And vice versa. If you have a progress of +3, your tradition's at -3. So one of the most common and basic ways to bring in your balance is if you have to do something that you're kind of bad at, where the stat you would normally roll is like negative or neutral. You can expend a currency, you can expend some fatigue, and call on one of your principles, and you can roll with that principle instead of the normal stat. Because in that moment, you have to say how your character is motivated by a certain value to do that thing. And this is important because this is something that we see not only because it's like a design tradition in Apocalypse World, but also because it's a thing that we see characters do in the Avatar series. There are moments when Korra, for example, when Korra is struggling with airbending, and she's motivated by something outside just like being good at airbending, by the pro bending match that she's in, and that allows her to do a really good job with airbending with an airbending based concept that she otherwise struggled with. So moments like that were what we were trying to capture with that. Like, I'm going to do this thing. It should be really hard for me. Everyone thinks I shouldn't succeed because I'm just a kid doing grown-up stuff. But you know what? This matters to me because it's related to this theme that's running through the show and that's running through my character. So I'm going to call on that to express this theme. And then the way that, unlike your main 4 stats, creativity, focus, harmony, and creativity, focus, harmony, and what's the last stat?
I'm drawing a blank.
Passion.
That's it.
Yep.
Yeah, I made those up. I don't know why I should forget them. Your balance stat, as we've mentioned, it goes back and forth based on things that happen. So another thing that often happens in the Avatar series is characters yell at each other not only about their own values, but about the other character's values. And we see this all the time with, for example, Prince Zuko and Uncle Iroh. And when Iroh says, like, it's time for you to look inward and start asking yourself the big questions, and then, whatever the meme puts in there, you all know that meme. Yeah. But the important part about that is that Iroh is calling on Zuko not to live up to Iroh's principles, but to figure out what Zuko's principles and live up to them. So there's also a mechanism in the game for calling someone out and saying, you need to think about your principles that matter to you and how that's going to change your life. And those are the moments when your principle shifts in one direction or another. And if you do that, if you call someone out, they also have an opportunity to call you out in turn and do the same thing to you.
Ooh.
And
that sounds real spicy. I really like that. So go ahead, Daniel.
No, I was
Yeah,
just gonna say
call
like
out culture.
call out culture. Well, one thing that I was, I think what's really neat about that is that it gets everybody kind of invested in each other's characters, right? Because this is a game where you're not playing as the avatar, like you're not playing as the avatar, right? And you're thinking about like this huge, rich world all around you. You have basically all the lore master of this game design project is right here on the podcast with us. Like, you're the lore master. Let's be honest, you're the lore master. And you've like teased out all of these themes and like set pieces and key people that can be talked to. But I think what's really interesting is that like another core thing that we haven't really talked about too much is, the theme of learning. Right. There's this balance and there's this growth and change, and growth is another key word in the game. Right. But there's this change, this transformation all the characters kind of go through. And with that, it comes learning and how you get better at techniques in like the combat system and things like that. Because we see that in Avatar when you were talking about, Korra trying to master airbending and ways in which Korra, learned these things. Or when Aang was going around trying to find a master and trying to learn all these different forms of bending. And then we get, cool new characters like Toph and things like that, right? So I think like learning is another like really neat part of the game. Because, when you're playing other like games like D&D and you're like, okay, well, like I level up and I get this thing. I have it. Here we go. It's done, right? But in Avatar, it's like there are not only like mechanical repercussions to meeting teachers and mentors, because a teacher can be anybody, right? And I think that's just a lesson to take in real life, right? Anybody can be a teacher, right? And you can learn from anybody, and the best teachers are also the best learners. But I think what's so cool about the game is that, learning is a core mechanic, and it's how you get better, and you have conversations about what happened, right, in the game and what you want to do to get better, and then balance, of course, is integrated into all of that.
And like as a piece of one could argue that Avatar: Last Airbender is a piece of YA media, right? And there are lots of definitions of what YA media is, right? It's not just media for people who are young adults, right? There are lots of other definitions of what YA media is, and one of them is this idea of YA media is media that's focuses on like coming of age stories, focuses on Bildungsroman, focuses on like growing up and learning, right? And I think one of the neat things that Mendez and the rest of the core mechanic design team has done is integrate this idea of learning into like various aspects of the game, right? So for example, many of you might be familiar with many PBTA games have a set of questions at the end that you answer in order to get experience, right? And so some of those questions are about like, did you help another team member learn about the world, learn about themselves, or grow, right? That's one thing. Another thing is this whole idea of balance. When like Mendez talked about this calling out thing, you can also change what's called the center of your balance, right? And the shifting your center of the balance is a mechanical representation of learning more about yourself, right? Like, no, I am actually more traditional than I am progressful, right? That's another thing. And then, as you're talking about Dan, with the teachers, the way to learn the most, like the arguably coolest techniques in order to use in like combat exchanges and things, you can't learn it yourself, right? Unlike like you were saying, a D&D wizard who will like do research and then finally learn how to cast time stop, you can't just teach yourself those things. You must learn from all these mentors. So it's various aspects of the game thread this idea of learning, which I think marries again really well to this idea that it is a YA themed, YA focused story experience. So,
yeah.
Can any of you this might be asking a lot. Can any of you give me more details on how the learning and growth feels or like manifests the game? Like I got some ideas here, but I would love to know more about what a teacher is and what a student is and how the game kind of reinforces those roles or maybe helps break those roles.
At a really broad level, I think one of the most interesting things is that learning and growth has to happen really over multiple sessions,
Mhm.
So you're not going to be like instantly, like I'm going to like get a million things in one session. I think what's cool about it is that, you know, the game design and how, you know, your characters grow and how the mechanics actually interface with that are very much like a TV show. It's episodic, which is what I think is really neat. And during our meetings, I remember I have like my notebook right here with all of my like Avatar feedback, and I'm like, you really need to lean into like this TV language, right? So like for me, I think it manifests like very, very organically in the conversations that you're having and how the mechanics and how the moves, because like for I think Vince and Meg did a really cool thing with Apocalypse World and this system in general, right? Whereas you have a game like Dungeons and Dragons, it's like, okay, if something has like uncertainty or risk, you roll the d20 and you see if something happens. But in like a Powered by the Apocalypse game, what the best sort of Powered by the Apocalypse games do is they have like moves that have narrative triggers. So everything that you do in a Powered by the Apocalypse game is basically, if there's any risk or uncertainty, it's mediated by a move. And moves each have narrative triggers. And there is an art to writing a PBTA move, because you want it to be like thematically evocative, which I think they are for Avatar, but also like they have to be ambiguous enough that they could apply to a variety of potential scenarios. And what I think is really cool is that, you know, like, I don't know if I'm going on a tangent here, but basically like as your characters improve and as, you know, you learn, you are being steered there by the mechanics, right? In the conversations you have, in how balance works, in how you grow, and how you actually get better at combat by actually trying things and engaging with moves and those narrative triggers. I think that's the biggest strength of Powered by the Apocalypse in general.
I was gonna actually push Sen to take that another level. So Sen, you were one of the driving forces behind like the theory behind how learning happens in this game, drawing on both like your psychology professor background and your background like studying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a martial art that is notorious for having like really specific, often like kind of finicky techniques.
Sure. They are. I don't.
They take a lot of attention to learn. They have a lot of, and like with many other like grappling and ground fighting styles, often you know, a technique which, you know, you stand up and you try to do it and it's like two things, but because you're doing it on the ground, somehow it becomes 12. So I wanted to push you to talk a little bit about like how people learn to do martial arts moves, like how that happens.
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of it is, so it starts off typically what we call like just modeling, right? So you're modeling the movements for the people. They typically go through it. You might do some physical prompting of them to tell them, no, this is where your body should be. This is what you should look for. But a lot of it is definitely through doing it, especially with a lot of like techniques where you can actually do the full technique. So strikes and things like that. So like a temi and whatnot. If you actually did them for real, you know, hurt people a lot. So with grappling, it's actually really easy to do a full technique because a person can just like tap out and say, yeah, that hurts enough for me to say, stop, we're done. And so a lot of martial arts techniques are done through doing or learned through doing. And actually, you know, that saying of, you know, practice makes perfect, or perfect practice makes perfect. But in the martial arts, a lot of times you learn from making mistakes. You learn from the consequence of, oh, when I did this, I opened myself up to, you know, kick in the midsection or whatever. Or we were talking about Bassfruitin before. I opened myself up to a liver kick. There we go. Just to get past back in there. And so the idea in combat in Avatar Legends is that your techniques are learned, practiced, and mastered. And once you learn something, that's at like a very low level. Like I understand theoretically what's supposed to happen. I might have done it a few times, but I'm nowhere near able to pull it off all the time, 100% of the time, in a do or die situation or even a sparring match. And then once you get to practice, then it can be used effectively in a real situation. And if you master it, you can kind of use it at will. You can do it when you want to, just like a basic technique. So there are different levels of techniques, and there are different levels of learning those techniques. And it really does reflect, how well a person in a martial art can do these things. There are lots and lots of basic things, like a basic, say a basic punch. Your basic punch, kind of anybody who has studied martial art for like even 1 or 2 days of class knows how to kind of throw a punch. But then you start adding combos, and you start adding, punches from different angles or different techniques. And then that becomes this higher level of skill that you need to master. In something like jiu-jitsu, it usually ends up being like this very basic move that somebody has turned into this very complex system because the other people have learned how to defend the basic style of it. And so it's an advancement it's like an arms race. It's like a techniques arms race. And we see that in Avatar Legends by the whole learned, practice, mastered system, in terms of, when you learn a move, that's your baseline. You've learned it, but you can get better at that as you fail at it, as you do more of it. And I think those are really, really, really cool in order to help people feel like they have to go out and explore the world and learn new techniques from more people, which is kind of the thing that I think Sharang was getting at in terms of why I lit and where it sits in Avatar Land. In terms of all the time in Avatar Land, people are going out and seeking out masters of a new technique, people who can show them how to do something differently than they already know how to do. And I think that's a real core part of the theme of the show.
Yeah.
And I actually wanted to ask Yunsu, in your division of the eras, did you do anything where you put, because I haven't really looked at it lately, is there anything where it says this era is good for these types of stories?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, and that's part of like the kind of the incorporating specific themes into each era.
Mm-hmm.
And like every thing has kind of inspiration or hooks for potential adventures or ways to use characters, or like trying to find the right language to use this without like spelling out everything that's in this chapter of the book, but which is hard. But yeah, like it's there's a lot of kind of suggestions on how to incorporate the things that are unique about each era, and some of that is spelled out like right at the beginning of each era section.
That's so cool.
So one specific question that we actually got from one of our patrons was about metal bending, because metal bending only existed from one era and then forevermore. So when you were designing this and trying to figure this all out, how does that kind of manifest in the game?
Yeah. Go on, John.
No.
Oh no, I was just going to say that like it's definitely made very clear that like Toph is metal bending, like the founder of all metal bending teachings, and we talk about that like quite a bit. Mechanically, somebody else might be able to better speak to that.
I'm sorry. Oh, wow.
Amazing.
I think this question of metal bending,
speaking of
is
metal,
actually a question of canonicity, right? Because the shows and the comics say...
Could you define that word?
Oh, yeah. That's what I was going to do. I'm a teacher. I'm an educator.
Oh, perfect.
The show says... this thing is canon. This thing is what we as the creators of the show say is the true sequence of events, which is Toph discovered metal bending and then her descendants popularized it. And now it's a thing in the Korra era, right? This is canon. However, a role-playing game does not need at a table level to respect canon at all, right? At the book level, we want to present this is what the canon stories are, so that if you want to engage with the stories with the authorial vision that is out there, this is how you do so. However, you at the table can decide, can we talk to the players and be like, can we actually say that metal bending was a hidden practice, that a secret cult hidden in the bowels of a volcano in the Fire Nation did, and that they can actually metal bend, and Toph just rediscovered it on the side? Of course you can do that. It's your table, right? The Magpie police aren't going to come and wallop you and say, what are you
the
doing?
Daily
right?
aren't going to find you.
Oh,
exactly. And make you forget
Daily,
that you ever had this
Daily.
idea, right? And so the way that bending works in the game is, while there are specific techniques and stuff that involve bending or any of the other skills like weapons and gadgets, we mustn't forget those, there's a large proportion of the whole idea of bending that is free form. So you can decide, I'm an earthbender. Can I lava bend? Can I metal bend? Or can I, like one of the players in my playtest decided that she can't move large blocks of rock. She can't. She can only do fine manipulation of small pieces of metal in the gadgets that she makes for her family, right? So she's very good at snapping her fingers and entire gadgets disassemble in front of your eyes, but she can't put up a wall of rock to defend herself, right? And that was a character choice that she made. So this idea of the specialized bending and blah, 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 while there are combat techniques that emulate those, and we can talk about how oh yeah, it's harder to do in combat because of focus involved, bending is kept free form in order to allow people to break from canon as much as they like, to tell the styles of stories they want to like. And the good thing is, this stems from the genius of Vince and McGay's system, right? They designed a system where more often than not, you're either going to fail or have complications, right? So even if you want to play a character who's I'm awesome in metal bending, it's not always going to work. More often than not, there's going to be complication, and the GM can say, oh yeah, you try and metal bend and all the iron rivets fly towards you and try and impale you, right? Because you're bad at it. And so the system can help reinforce the idea that bending is hard and things are hard. And again, that reinforces the idea of learning, right? Because you're gonna have lots and lots of failures, which is automatically going to create narrative moment where you will learn from those failures.
I really like that explanation, and folks, feel free to jump in if you have any other thoughts on that. But I love that because it kind of, like you said, straddles that very delicate line as to allowing people to really interact with the IP as it's written and as they might have interacted with it in the past, while also allowing them to weave their own stories. So my personal experience, I could absolutely see a future where I'm you know what, I'd like to be someone who convergently developed metal bending and for some reason was never credited for it. That seems really, really fun for me. So I'm glad that the game,
Tesla and Edison.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it gives me both. Yeah. I love that. I mean,
that could be a whole story arc. It could be set during let's say the Korra era, and your character's family, Steve, harbors this resentment towards Beifong because you're wait, we've been doing this for much longer and you've received no credit, and we have these powerful techniques. What's going on?
I was in Ohio at a restaurant where they claimed they made the Wendy's square burger, and they were so salty about it. They were just they would not let me leave unless they told me the entire history of how they were betrayed. And their mascot is a naked baby that just stares at you. And I was I don't want to say it out loud, but there's a reason why your brand didn't kick off and someone else's did.
Where is this, Steve?
I had to look up the city, but it was in Ohio. So
why would you say something so controversial yet so brave?
Yeah, this is what we do on Asians Represent.
I love that you thought that I was brave enough to say it to their faces. The answer was no. I ate my food and left. But I love that idea. Staying on that idea, though, there's another concept that I've kind of noticed in Avatar, and I'm not 100% sure of the canonicity, learn a new word, of it. But I believe the series kind of plays this idea that benders used to be more powerful in the past, and their bending actually got weaker as time went on. So am I completely off there, or am I? Is there a concept?
So that's not something I've personally delved into a whole lot because there is like some explanation. Granted, there are also like a million avatars that we don't even like in canon know the name of, basically.
Right.
So there are like a bunch of kind of lost eras, for lack of like a better terminology right now. Just eras we don't know as much of. Like in the show, we see kind of like, here is all these avatars stretching out into the distance to represent how many avatars there are. There's a lot of kind of like shadowy figures in the back with kind of vague features. And then we go all the way back and we have Avatar 1, like the first Avatar and Rava, and like how they merged to become like the first Avatar spirit. And we do talk about that a little, not as like a playable era, but as like this is what the Avatar is, and this is how it kind of gets set up. But I personally can't really speak a whole lot to bending being, and because also in part it's like it would be a challenge because you don't want to make sure that people like in an earlier era or in a later era feel like more or less empowered than they would be, like, because that's kind of I don't know. I mean, people as a table, getting them all to agree, it's like, yes, I would like to play kind of like an underpowered character versus like I want to play like a super overpowered character. It can be hard to get a whole table to like agree to do that, or get on that exact same page. But yeah, I mean, it's not something I personally tackled much in the setting chapter.
It could
But I also think,
go
Yansu,
ahead.
that like the idea of over and underpowered is less conspicuous in a well-designed Powered by the Apocalypse game, right? Like, and again, credit to Vince and McGay for doing this, but the game is all about you can always fail and then horrible things will happen to you, right? So like even in a game like I'm thinking of Masks, right, where you have the Nova who can do a lot of things, you can just keep failing at doing all those lots of things and then nothing will happen. So
that is exactly what happened in my last game of Masks. The Nova just bit it. All game.
I think one thing to also bring up is that, like, you know, we have this like intersection of like game system, right? Powered by the Apocalypse. We have this intersection of like everyone else's, you know, unique sort of experiences that come into this design process, but also like every single person who has like written an official Avatar story, right? And they all kind of come together. But one thing that's interesting is that, like, Steve, you know, like the depictions of bending are not as like powerful or stuff. There are also things that we see like in the show, like thematically that are different, right? You know, during Aang's like era, this is like a time of conflict. So we see bending that's used in conflict more often, right? And then during Korra's era, bending was used like very prominently in sport when we're actually seeing it in the show. So you're seeing
like
different
practical uses,
or like
right?
practical
like
usage.
lightning and stuff, yeah.
Or like how like the
power
metal
plants.
Yeah, or like the metal bending police officers kind of like zip around, right? It's so we're seeing like this, like the application of bending in different contexts, but also like one thing that I think is really cool is that, and I know this is one of the questions that we had from one of our patrons, is that you also see, you know, powerful characters who aren't benders, right? You see that a lot in like Korra, because like Asami, like one of the best characters, right? Asami is so cool. But the non-bending characters that you see very prominently in the original series were really just like Sokka. And those two characters are very, very different. And, you know, how they act and how they interact with other benders is highly contextual, right? Based on the stories and the themes of those eras that obviously Yansu is, you know, kind of condensing for people to, you know, learn about Avatar, or for those who are trying to, you know, take these big, huge story arcs and turn it into something that's theirs at their table. We have a couple of questions about, you know, non-bending. So Kara from our Patreon community on Discord asked, you know, how are benders going to get balanced with non-benders? Will there be multiple types of powerful non-bender options? How will different types of benders be mechanically, not just with flavor, like be differentiated? Now, I think we talked a lot about like different kinds of bending, right? But one of the things that I think would be interesting is empowering characters who are not benders and having players, you know, feel empowered at the table as a non-bending character. And I think that's something to talk about.
Answer and then pass it on to someone else.
Yeah.
So the first thing I want to say is that fundamentally, characters in most Apocalypse World games, are not about their powers, right? Fundamentally, a playbook in a Powered by the Apocalypse game is about the character arc you wish to pursue. Again, most powered by the Apocalypse games, right? And this is very true in Avatar Last Airbender. You don't pick a character sheet by, I'm going to pick the firebender sheet or the waterbender sheet or the combustion bender sheet or whatever, right? You pick a sheet, the icon whose backstory is important in this way, the idealist whose view and philosophy of the world and people in it is important in this way, the hammer whose view of how one must act to deal with situations is important in this way. That forms the core of your character sheet. And then the bending versus non-bending is a secondary the secondary trait, one could say, of the character. And now I'll let someone else speak.
So one subsystem that we use to express this idea, is so when you're in combat, you choose approaches and you choose techniques, and then they interact with other peoples. And one of the ways that those things get expressed is through status effects. One thing that we've all noticed about we've probably all noticed about the original TV show, is that combat is highly non-lethal. Scenes where someone dies because of combat are highly rare. And one of the reasons, and it's a kid's show, so there's limits on how much people can die. And then that kind of lethality changes in places like, if you read the Kyoshi novels, all of those ways that that you thought you were thinking like in the TV show, wow, you could kill someone in like a really upsetting way using this power. Yeah, all of that stuff happens in the Kyoshi novels, because it's a different kind of audience and there's a different kind of creative emphasis. Content warning for that. But the interesting thing about blood and lethality and broken bones being a lower priority in the TV show means that combat has to be about controlling the environment and using your effects on the environment to take away someone's ability to fight you. So this idea, like if you know like military science, this idea of like combat being about removing your enemy's ability to fight you might be familiar to like those of you who've studied like Sun Tzu or Clausewitz or something like that. Avatar like makes that very, very literal. So when you take actions in combat, in a lot of role-playing games, like in D&D, it's like you take a combat action and then you describe it, and you might have a cool description, but the cool description is kind of the icing on top. In Avatar Legends, I like to think of it as the other way around. Your description forms like the meat and bones of what you are doing in combat. So when you describe what your firebender is doing, like the shape of the fire that you describe, the way it affects the room around you, what catches on fire and what doesn't, that's like that description, like that's what combat is really, really about. And so that gets expressed in a bunch of different ways. It can affect your individual enemies in terms of their fatigue track, how tired they are, in terms of their conditions, how emotionally off balance they are and upset they are. And then their balance track, how close to like feel like a moral or ethical extreme you're pushing them to. That's the way, like, so you still have like hit points, as it were, quote unquote, but each of those hit points means something in the fiction. And then what's just as important as that is the way you describe what you're doing, which is expressed through the technique choices that you make and what kind of status effects they inflict. So the different techniques that you choose, you can choose to target, for example, I want to affect an area with my firebending. And I'm going to set it on fire so that the other firebender on the team has a source of fire to draw on to make themselves more powerful. I'm going to target a person so their clothes catch on fire and they're impaired. I'm going to make a wall of fire in front of the Republic City cops, so the rest of the people in my triad can get away and the cops have to work through that wall. in order to catch up to us. So the techniques that you choose create these status effects in the world, and the status effects they're not just icing. Like, that's the bread and butter of combat. So if you think of combat less about like knocking your opponent down to zero and more about controlling the battlefield using like a combination of descriptions and technique choices to create a situation in the fiction that is favorable to you, that's the way that's how that works. And then the fictional limitations that you have, like being this or that kind of bender, like those things become very, very real in your descriptions. It's really easy to trap someone using firebending. But because of the way we see firebending work, if I want to move someone back, if I want to force them out of an area, I have to do it kind of indirectly. I have to set stuff on fire that they want to move away from. Whereas if I had airbending, I could literally just push them back without even thinking about it. But if I'm airbending, it would be really hard to like create a trap in a certain location and just leave it there while I run away. If I want to set up a whirlwind, I got to keep that going. So all of these like metaphysical or physical rules rather that surround bending in the fiction are like, those are the primary rules of combat that really like delineate what combat is about.
And
So
Mendez, how do
Mendez-
non-benders fit into that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you're creating a non-bender, I would highly recommend that you think big. So if you're coming up with your fighting style, so there's the 4 kinds of bending, and then there's technology, and hand-to-hand. And I would highly recommend that, like, if you want to have a cool weapon, absolutely you can have a cool weapon, but think a little bit bigger than that. So instead of just like, I fight with a fan, right? I have this metal club, it opens up, sometimes it closes, I hit people with it. Like, you can do that, but you can go bigger than that. So instead of just being like, I fight with fans,
With the giant fan.
I would want to say I'm a Kyoshi warrior. I don't just have this fan. I have 2 fans. I have a sword for backup. I have Japanese armor, and I have this dope ass like makeup and dress that I'm gonna wear. And I have a whole like suite of fighting approaches that are based on that. So I'm really, really good at like protecting people. You have to be more creative in some ways, because you can't just say like, I make a wall of fire, but that also happens on the show. The non-benders who can keep up with the benders are the ones who have like really creative ways of applying their fighting style.
And
with technology, one of the coolest characters that I saw was like, we were playing like a Republic City triad kind of game, and one of my play testers was like, I'm the getaway driver. So my technology fighting style is based on like stunt driving. So there was a fight where they were trying to get away from the Republic City cops, where she was driving a delivery truck, like not even a motorcycle, not like a cool automobile sports car, just a regular delivery truck. And she was just like describing it like careening and crashing through Republic City, and it was like one of the coolest like applications of the combat system I've ever seen. So even if you're just fighting with swords, like think about it the way that Sokka does. Think about it the way that Suki does in terms of mobility across the landscape. Think about like, Sokka getting the blimps to crash into each other. So think like, if you're going to do that, like think big. You're allowed to. The game wants you to.
And I'll say that this is like, go ahead, Sid. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that it's kind of what Steve was saying before, in terms of, were people more powerful in the past? And the answer is probably not. It's just that technology is plays such a bigger role in like the Korra series, where we have like mech suits and stuff like that. So you can think pretty darn big in terms of weaponry, in terms of technology, where your characters can do stuff that is equally as descriptive and equally as able to control the battlefield as bending any of the elements is. That's all.
And I'll say like narratively and like in terms of fiction, like this isn't novel, right? We see this in like when you play D&D. What if you play a character that isn't a magic user? You adapt, right? But I think the thing that's really great about Avatar game is that mechanically, it enables you to do that, right?
Yeah.
You look at other fiction like Star Wars, like I'm wearing a Star Wars shirt right now. Like right? The cool thing about Star Wars is like, oh, who went to war? The Mandalorians went to war with the Jedi, and they developed technology to literally fight against the Jedi, even though they did not have any, Force users, right? And so, like, you can do this, like, narratively. You can have a badass non-bender who is like, when you said, oh, yeah, make it bigger, I was like, yeah, I have a sword. I have a giant sword. That's how I think. Or, like, I have 7 swords. But at the same time...
And again, there's the idea of balance, right? Dan, in that all the characters are balanced against each other because the conflict resolution mechanic that Vince and McGay came up with means that anyone can equally fail as much as anyone else, right? Exactly. So it could happen that all your benders are like going blue in the face trying to beat up someone, but keep missing on their dice rolls, and the non-benders are just like, la la la, wallop them, right? So this idea of balance, I mean, it ends up being a normal curve, hopefully, unless you have loaded dice, but it ends up in that non-benders, technologists, benders, whatever, end up ultimately being in a fictional position, at least at this sort of like level playing field. And of course, you can play with that idea like the shows do, right? Korra's first season is all about what is a non-bender versus a bender, right? So you can think of that in narrative terms.
Yeah. The episode with the Yuyan archers, I think is an awesome example of how to think about this. The moment when they shoot the net at him, and Aang airbends into the net, and it goes through the holes in the weighted net, and he gets caught anyway. Like, those are the moments that you want to create as a non-bender. Think about how you would approach the problem of bending in this kind of situation, and think of ways that, like, you would try to outsmart a bender, because benders are really, really good at countering other elements as well as their own element. That's what they're best at. I can think of a way to use air to counter water or fire or earth. But if you can think of ways to use your weapons that aren't as vulnerable to the way that people describe, like, the motion of air and fire and water and earth, like, that's where you're going to be able to, like, even the odds or get the edge.
And I think there should be some clarification, because I did see a comment in our chat of, like, like, what about gliders? Is flight a mechanic? Like, we say these in, like, very, like, broad narrative terms as well, right? Like, you are being creative. You are not bound by these items. Like a gliding staff, like the airbenders have, doesn't give you a +2 to this, right? It is something that you use and you evoke narratively to use with the existing game system, right? And like Sharang said, that's the power of PBTA. You can do anything, and you will fail, but you will succeed.
Right. Like for that's a great example. Without the staff, the GM has every right to say, you can't fly. Well, how can you fly? You can't fly, right? But with the staff, the GM can say, great, now you fly. Now you're going to roll this move, and let's see if you succeed in flying or whatever. It's not you get +2 to flight, or you now gain a fly speed, or you now get GURPS points to buy flight or something. Right?
There isn't even a fly move.
Yeah. So here, like, even if you were a non-bender, what if you got, like, maybe my character is a purveyor in, like, antiquities, and I have this air nomad, like, gliding staff, right? I could try to fly with it. I just gotta jump off something real high and hope that the dice really help me, right?
And hope that they're thermals, right?
Yeah.
Right. The kid in the episode with the inventor.
Yep.
Exactly. The glider chair.
Yep.
Like, that's like this is exactly what I'm hoping to see from, like, non-bender characters. Like, yeah, absolutely, play someone who's good at swords, but think about how you would use not just swords but also other stuff to even the odds.
I think that was the most evocative episode for me, for sure. And just sharing my 2 main takeaways are, 1, when I get to play this game finally, I'm gonna push for a non-bender fully group.
Yeah.
And I think that's gonna be a lot of fun, because that's a story I don't think gets explored a lot. 2, apparently Mendes thinks the opposite of icing on the cake is bones and potatoes, meat and potatoes, meat and bones.
It's a meat cake.
It's a meat cake.
They're popular on social media.
Because if you told
Did
me the
I show
opposite
you the
of
meat
icing,
cake the other day, Mendes? It's a really awesome meat cake.
I'm so worried about this.
Oh my god.
I mean, I like a handsome beefcake.
Steve, aren't you basically a meat cake yourself? Like, in real life?
I prefer buff nugget.
Buff
but-
Nugget. Buff
Nugget.
Nugget.
But I'm glad you asked.
That's your next character name.
Should,
for
should
sure.
I put that underneath your thing on the overlay? It's just like DEM
Yes,
Steve,
please do.
he him, and then put Buff Nugget.
I'm pretty sure I just consented to it like on this stream, so like that's totally fine.
We
There
can,
you
we can
go.
add that in the future if you want. Make a Buff
But-
Nugget shirt.
Ooh, that'd be good. But we are running out of time, and there's one question that I did want to ask, which we may run out of time out, but I think it's okay because I think it's a pretty deep question, and I'm okay with some pretty surface level ones, and we can dive deeper on other platforms and whatnot. But at the very top of this episode, we were talking about how Avatar was written by two white guys primarily, and then there were other contributors and whatnot. But Avatar itself is not really directly like a Korean story or a Japanese story or a Chinese story or whatever you want to say. It alludes to Asian elements, and in some ways it does it really well. In other ways it doesn't. While you were working on this game, was there anything that you at the top of your mind were like, Avatar did this really, really well as far as a theme or element goes? Or was there something that stood out as something that I'm going to try to improve this element?
I've got an answer to this because I brought this up quite a bit during our meetings, and it's like the use of identifiable Asian signifiers as an aesthetic in Avatar. There are things that it does really well and things that can be improved upon, right? And one thing that it does really well that I think is really neat is that in some ways, you know, there are very clear like, this is inspired by China, or like, this is inspired by Tibet, and then this is kind of like a strange mashup of cultures, right? So for one of the things that I did was write out NPC names, right? Because a lot of the things that you see are like, you know, folks are, well, you know, the world of Avatar has this Asian aesthetic, and I really want to have like a name that feels grounded in the world of Avatar. I just read all this amazing lore. Wow, I even saw that writer is on the Avatar wiki. What a legend.
Yunsu.
Yunsu, wow. Right? And then if I go on the wiki, I can see it. Amazing, incredible, right? But like, what if I want to, you know, ground myself in this world, and I don't want to call my character Aang, or like I don't want to call my character Mako, because these are the names that I know. So for me, like, I spent a lot of time writing out names for NPCs that would fit into all of these different, you know, like nations, kingdoms, these groups. But not only writing out names, but including their real life cultural meaning, and the cultures that they came from, so that when people are actually playing the game, fingers crossed, they'll be looking at these NPCs and be like, oh, okay, that's what this name means. And I can actually go and kind of form a character around it, right? So to answer your question, Steve, I think like Avatar, you know, one thing that I think it receives claim for is the fact that in a way it doesn't feel super appropriative. You know, like we're reading like Karatur live, and the big thing about Karatur is like, oh my god, like even though this is like a fantasy world, this is so very obviously meant to be China, or this is so very obviously meant to be Japan, right? You are even using real life things like feng shui, like in Shoulung. But in Avatar, it's like, I think its use of Asian themes as an aesthetic is both a strength and a weakness, right? I think there's great things here because they kind of tend to avoid a lot of the faults that we see in other media properties that try to make use of Asian themes or an aesthetic, but they kind of take it to a whole other level. Like, you know, Oriental Avengers is a really good one where you take real life things and you throw them into something fictional. And like, you know, like where I think it could go, like where it can improve, I think, you know, this is a really, really good example of like why having designers like Sen, Yunsu, Sharang, and Mendez on the project is so important. And that's why I think it's so important that like Sharang, you've called out this like multiple times during the recording, that this is not just these two people who have created Avatar. It is also all of these people who have written the comics and the novels and the artists who have contributed, right? And, you know, people like you folks, I guess me, but you folks who, this is weird being Asians represent, and this doesn't matter. You folks, you know, having participated in this, right? It's important to have people who have a martial arts background designing the combat system, right? And playtesting the combat system. It's important for people who are educators and work with children, you know, to see how learning and how the materials are actually presented to readers and users, right? It's important for people who have, you know, a lot of experience world building and incorporating aspects of real world cultures, Hearts of Wulin, Yansu, right? So I think that's like, I think it's just like I think avatars are just really cool property because of that, right? And I think it's, you know, while the question, I wrote the question in our notes, I think the answer lies in the fact that like Avatar, while on paper is like these two white presenting dudes co-created it, is the product of a lot of other voices. That is like a long-winded way of being like, there are lots of like different perspectives involved in creating the world of Avatar.
One of the things that we spoke about in the very first design meeting, where at least where the five of us were, obviously Magpie had lots of secret meetings and things, but the very first meeting we had, one thing we brought up a lot was this idea that Avatar takes the TV show properties take pains to reinforce the fact that there are no cultures that are monolithically one way or the other, right? We talk about the idea of there is no evil, right? And you see that where in the first season of the show, the Fire Nation is bad, the Fire Nation is bad. In the starting intro theme, the Fire Nation attack, blah, 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 right? But then in the third season, we learn so much more about the Fire Nation, right? And then later on, we see like the Water Tribes, oh no, they're so oppressed. But then also we see like the blood-bending lady, right? Whose desire for colonial vengeance drives her to do like horrible things, right? We see that in the Korra era, where like these Water Nation tribes are like infighting about which Water tribe is now in power, right? So we talked a lot about, we wouldn't want, it's very easy to fall into the trap of, okay, let's make a game where Fire Nation bad, Firebenders bad, Fire Soldiers bad, right? And we talked about how we wanted to present a world that the shows do that prevents that, we try and prevent that from happening, right? Where Yansu did a lot of world building writing to prevent that idea from like, yes, Fire Nation is always bad. Air nomads are always like poor, you know, cupcakes, that you cinnamon buns that you must protect because, you know, they're dying out or whatever, right? And we were very concerned about this idea that we don't want to show monocultures, and we don't want to show that's a different thing. Like a monoculture is a culture that is completely homogenous, right? Avatar does like Bolin and Mako are brothers, and yet one is a firebender, one's an earthbender, and they're in Republic City, right? This metropolis kind of thing. So we didn't want to show monocultures, and we didn't want to show cultures that are like stereotypically one way. And I think we had a lot of discussion about that. And I know Yansu is a brilliant writer, so I know. And I've read some of the work that they've produced. So, was that a heart or is that a snap? Oh, okay, thanks.
Heart.
And that's something that was important to all of us from the very first meeting.
I actually am looking at my notes. Oh, quickly. From the very first meeting we have, and the first thing that I wrote was, what does borrowing mean for these fictional cultures? And when you take these aesthetics, and then I also wrote, is culture a function of fiction? And we want to avoid things like bioessentialism and broad sweeping generalizations in the world of Avatar. Yeah, just I thought that was interesting because I was like, oh, I have my notebook literally right in front of me, and I haven't opened it since our last Avatar meeting. But yeah. I think it's really cool that we're all working on this now. Like, sorry, Yanzu, Mendez, and Sen, did you want to answer this question that Steve has posed?
Yeah, again, I'm looking for your thoughts on, you know, what Avatar really did kind of well that you wanted to highlight, and then also kind of some things that you're like, I can improve that. I can do better.
There's one thing that I keep thinking about from the comics that I really appreciated, because it's just like, the comics are really, I mean, the shows are good at this too, but the comics are just like chef's kiss good at like presenting problems and really showing like, and there's no like super easy solution that everyone's going to love. There's no like this is the magical solution that will fix all the problems. Like in the Promise, which is the first trilogy after the end of Airbender, you know, we talk about decolonization and like the fact that you have like these families that are mixed now, and you know, you're just gonna tear them apart because you're trying to like move people back to the Fire Nation. And people have like really strong opinions of that, and we see people on like all these different sides of that conflict. And then when you get to the third trilogy, The Rift, I think it's in The Rift that we start seeing the air acolytes. And
notice how much Avatar material Yansu has like memorized.
Consumed.
Yeah,
no, the air acolytes. There's a little bit in The Promise with the cultural appropriation.
Oh, was that in The Promise? I couldn't remember where.
Yeah, where Aang's trying to figure out like whether the air acolytes are cultural appropriation,
right? Because one of them gets the Airbender master tattoos, and she thinks it's like I just love air nomad culture so much. I want to like show this love I have of it and like keep it alive. I'm gonna get these tattoos because I want to live in like side my love for air nomad culture. And Aang sees it, and he's like, "What? Excuse me." Like these are tattoos that are like sacred to my, and like, you know, I love, there's a lot of interesting material out there and that you can read about like closed practices, right? And like air nomad tattoos are meant for air bending masters. Like it's very specific. Right. It's not just like something that has significance and it's kind of available to everyone. It's for a very specific spiritual and practical and like kind of cultural and societal purpose. Like it has like all these functions that
they're like Maori tattoos in a way for that, in that sense, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And like eventually, I mean, oh god, I will not spoil the arc, but I like the way that it's dealt with a lot, and that like they talk about it. Aang has like a very visceral reaction to it, which like is very understandable.
How old is Aang like, in that part?
So I think it's about, is it like a year or two?
So very close to the show.
Very close to the show. He's still like
I don't think he's older than 15.
Yeah, he's not older than 15.
Okay.
But yeah, and like in the Korra tattoos, the Korra comics also like deal with different issues that, I mean, the comics are really good at taking kind of these open-ended questions that we don't get closure from the shows, and really tackling these problems and being like, here it is in all its glorious complexity.
Yeah. And here's what's really cool about like the game, the RPG, right? The stories that you could tell can live within these complex examinations of the consequences of the show, right? It could live between these moments too. If you really want to create a lore-driven, you know, TTRPG experience, you can do that. And so like I think a lot of people who have already apparently, like, how many people have backed the Kickstarter? I only know, I don't even know how many.
Oh, jeez. 43,786 backers.
Yeah, those people are gonna, you know,
42,987. Sorry, my mistake.
Oh, sorry. Are gonna look at, you know, that section that you wrote and be like, oh, I want to tell my story there, and then they're gonna use the mechanics of the game that Mendez designed to actually engage in these stories, and that's really cool. Sorry, we're gonna run out of time, but I want like Mendez and Sen, like I want to know like what do you really love about, you know, Avatar? What do you think it does well, and where do you think it can improve? Right, because again, like the best teachers are also the best learners.
So I mean, I love Avatar for many reasons. I got to watch it 3 times, so once by myself, once with my oldest son, and once with my youngest son, who is 5 years younger than my oldest son. So every so often we get to rewatch Avatar, and then I watched Korra multiple times because of having to make the game. So I think Avatar is just part of my life. It's been part of my life for ever since it came out, really, and it's still to this day is obviously part of my job and part of my life. So for me to say much bad about Avatar and Korra is really hard. What I think we can do better in the game that isn't really addressed in the show is, well, okay, so it's not addressed as much in Atla, but it is a little addressed a little bit more in Korra. And it's really actually nice when you watch all of them and you read the comics in between and things like that. You can see the progression of, it was like decidedly made for an audience to grow up with, right? That Korra is made for people who are fans of Atla, you know, 3 or 4 years or however many years between the shows there were, I can't remember, that had grown up in that time. And now they might be interested in more, you know, interesting plot lines.
Politically engaged.
Yes, more politically engaged. There you go. And I think because of that, the Avatar Legends game can go even further because our audience is going to be people who grew up watching that and are now into TTRPGs, and hopefully also their kids, and that kind of thing. And I think you can explore all these sorts of things. And one of the things that I love about PBTA and the system that Lumpley Games has come up with is that it allows you to explore all these types of stories and situations in a really easy package that isn't as stat blocked out as say D&D or whatever, and so there's a lot more freedom, I think, for the group, including the game master, to tell those stories that you want to look at. And I think, as my whole family are fans of the brand and the all the comics and stuff, that they might be interested in saying, okay, well, what happens after Korra, or what happened in between here? Or I'd really be interested in looking at these past eras that we only get these glimpses of in the cartoons. And I think that's where we can do a lot of good stuff with the book and the game, the RPG, is helping people fill out those blanks in a way that is more meaningful to them, an experience they can live and carry on with them and tell the stories that they want to tell in a world that they love as much as my family loves it. So I think that's where we can improve it in the world of Avatar. It's not necessarily improving on what there is already, but filling in those in-between gaps. I think that's where I'd like to focus.
Yeah.
Mendez.
I think that a lot of the flaws that I could bring up about Avatar are that the setting and the story, and this is a strength too, always brings up more questions than it has time to answer. Which is, it's what makes the expanded universe material so great, because it answers so many of those questions, and it's what Avatar Legends as an RPG gives us the perfect opportunity to leap into ourselves. I guess one thing that comes to mind is the representation of like a broader spectrum of Asian cultures. For example, for South Asian characters, we see relatively fewer South Asian coded characters. There's Patik in Avatar, and then we see Kuvira, and then in the comics there's Jargala, one of my favorite characters. And then in the earlier stuff there's Nyahita, but I don't remember entirely, in Shadow of Kyoshi. So I'm looking forward to bringing in like a greater diversity of Asian and indigenous influences. Like I'm looking forward to like what kind of stuff can I bring from my own Filipino background, and what of that can I put in the game? Like what nation, like if I had to figure out where Filipinos went in my home game, like where could I fit them in? And that's it's no like fatal flaw of the show that it didn't manage to represent everybody. Every show's always going to have that problem, and Avatar like does great with that. But again, always there's always more space around the edges, these spaces that Avatar implies, by having like South Asian coded characters or Arabic names. There's space, which is like the perfect, most fertile ground for our own creativity, which is perfect for an RPG to approach. So there's all those questions that have been asked, and now we get to answer some of them ourselves.
Yeah, I like that thing about your culture, because when you mentioned like Filipino culture, the only thing I could think of in Avatar is the use of like arnis and eskrima sticks in Korra. But I think that's like martial arts, and the techniques that you use is a really cool way of also representing cultures, right? Because there is a lot of, they draw on a lot of like some indigenous cultures with their names and some of the aesthetic, especially with the water tribe, right? What's really cool is that it'd be really neat to see some of those traditional like indigenous martial arts, like Akichita, brought into it, not only with bending, but also non-bending characters. If you haven't looked up like indigenous martial arts, you should look it up. There are some very interesting folks out there who are preserving those arts in a really neat way. Actually, one of them is in Toronto. I'll actually put a link to Okitchita and how you can learn that and who's teaching that in Toronto. Really cool.
Next breakout, we're going.
Yeah, I know,
Okay.
right? I know. I think that'd be super cool, right?
And we won't have fake guns on us.
Yeah, it's Steve. Well, Steve won't be in cosplay.
No one- I like how you're like, Steve's going to agree to that. Like, I'm not agreeing to that. Like, you can say it all you want. I'm not going to agree to that. But no, this was a great conversation. I'm so happy to have been here with all of you for this. For that last question there, I'll add in my little piece. The part that I wanted more from Avatar was actually food. The most like visceral scene I can think of is that they are in the swamps with all the swamp benders, and the swamp benders like, here's the food we eat, enjoy. And they're like, this is gross, and they eat it, and like, oh damn, it's good, it's really good food. And I'm like, yeah, that's right, more of those stories, please.
Well, what about all the cabbages?
They never talk about how they prepare the cabbages, and
True.
they're all like the round like European cabbages, right? For the comedic effect, because Napa cabbages they're not gonna
They
roll.
don't roll. Yeah.
They roll
Cabbages
differently.
don't have that same roll to them.
Exactly.
Some of the
Exactly.
most engaged scenes in my playtests were when I'd be like, okay, so what are you all eating in this scene? And we'd go
Yes.
like for like 10 minutes. Each player's like, well, I'm eating
We did
this.
a whole episode of Dungeons and Asians where we just talked about food. Like there was one episode, it was just a really awkward dinner that we did.
Oh, it was a spicy dinner in more than just one way. But I think we're running out of time here, and Daniel, I think I'm gonna hand over to you to give us our outro here.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, why don't we first thank Magpie Games, for sponsoring this, and of course like acquiring the rights to do Avatar, and then getting a team with these four amazing people on it, right? Also, special shout out to Mendez who messaged me on like Discord and was like, "Yo, can we talk?" Can I say this? Can I talk about this, Mendez? Because I think this is a cool thing to tell people.
I hope so. Probably.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this, but Mendez was like, "Okay, so I have an opportunity to work on a project and I can assemble a team. My design Asian Avengers." It's not what you said. Not what you said.
But it was what was going through your head.
That was what was going through your head, and I'm like, oh, which Avenger am I? Am I the Asian one? Am I Black Widow? I don't know. But then you were like, I have an opportunity to work on a property that I've always wanted to work on. And I was like, oh, what's this gonna be? And you're like, can we talk? And I was like, cool. In my head, I was like, oh, like the RZA is like, I want to adapt something into a TTRPG, and Mendez and
Right.
God
Which is what I thought. Which is what I thought this whole thing was at the beginning. Also. Yeah.
Which was also like, I was like, oh, that's super cool too. And I was like, oh, Man with the Iron Fist. Am I gonna like, oh, this is pretty sweet. And then you were like, we're working on Avatar. I was like, I'm in. Like, I don't care. I don't like, just let's go. Right? So like, super grateful for you, Mendez, for like bringing me on, because that's how I got onto this project. Super grateful to Magpie for sponsoring this episode of Asians Represent, and of course, super grateful for our patrons. Thank you for supporting Asians Represent as we kind of go into this new sort of era of the show. Like we took a break in June, and now we're back, and I think every episode that we've come back from has been an amazing episode. So thank you so much to our disciples, our initiates, and of course our guardians of the realm, Brooke Bright, Pixel Grotto, Daisy May, and our most honorable patrons. And it's not my idea. Ryan the Wizard Hall, Metal Weave Games, Valorous Games, Dungeon Glitch / Matt, and the most honorable ×2 Epic Impulse. You are the most honorable people supporting Asians Represent, and I have a special Sky Bison here to greet you. Yep, here's my Sky Bison. I have a real life Sky Bison, and it's Marla, who appears in every single episode. Marla is flying in. Marla is on screen as my Sky Bison, just for you, you most honorable.
It just says
patrons.
cat.
It just says.
This place is weird.
Yeah, right. All right, bye, Marla. Before you get angry.
Yeah, she loves this.
This is Marla's favorite part of the stream, when we talk about our most honorable patrons. But that said, thank you, folks like San Yansu, Sharang Mendez, thank you for joining us. Like, I'm glad, you know, when I sent us all our message, I was like, yo, we want to do this thing. I want to talk about like your work and like be present in discussions about, you know, like this IP, this project, and, you know, your amazing contributions. Thank you for saying yes.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
And
thanks
like,
for asking.
you know, we got to do this more. We got to do this more because I think now all of you have appeared on Asians Represent at least twice. And so we got to do another one. We got to do another one. That's it, folks. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Asians Represent. We'll see you next time. Stick around. We're going to go rate another channel and help support, you know, a new up-and-coming Asian streamer. We'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.